recording, and then I shall go to screen to share. All right. So thank you everybody for joining. My name is Alice from Kinesiology, and tonight's topic is the topic of kinesiology and kids. So I'm just going to move everybody over here so I can see what I'm doing. What shall I pick tonight? I might pick this one. Okay. So, for those who have joined me on previous nights, this is, the format will be somewhat similar. So we're going to obviously talk about kids tonight. So, and I actually liked this little meme or graph or picture or whatever we'd like to call it. Big things often have small beginnings. And I like this particular picture. It actually reminds me of my own kids. I remember taking a photo with one of them with Dad's feet as a picture. And it, you know, it's important for us, I think, to recognize that, you know, kids are not small adults. They are still little kids, and they're always looking to us to as yardsticks of how to behave, how to handle things, how to you know, how to do life, basically, particularly up to about the age of, you know, between 7 and 10 as a general rule. I can see someone is having a little bit of trouble getting in. Now that person I know, so I might just try and quickly message them. Actually, maybe they are in now. Let's have a quick look. No, we're in. Okay, cool. All right, so tonight we are going to talk about why kids have kinesiology. I've got a piece missing out of my slide again. That's all right. The root causes of the concerns that we tend to see with kids, because what I see with kids in clinic is very different, obviously, to what I see with adults as a general rule. And also the root causes are a little bit different. And I'm also going to explain how kinesiology works for kids, and then some practical tips and tools that you can use today or maybe tomorrow, depending on how old your kids are, that you can use straight away that aren't going to cost you anything as well. At the end, if we should have time, I'm more than happy to answer questions. And if I do see them pop up as I go, I'll answer them, but it doesn't seem to pop up particularly well. That's okay. So, kinesiology is it's both a body therapy and an energy therapy. So the reason that that's important is because we do work online, as we've had to over this COVID period. And when we work online, we obviously, I guess, work back to front. So we tap into your energy or your child's energy, and then do the muscle testing on ourselves. And that's where it's a body therapy. So it is literally the study of the science of muscle movement. And what that does is actually show the stress patterns in the body. So the added benefit of it is because we look at everything, head to foot, inside out, everything that's going on. It is actually a true holistic mind-body medicine therapy, which we incorporate things like traditional Chinese medicine, which I use very much in clinic, and also Ayurvedic medicine, which is the Indian version, I guess, of the ancient Chinese traditions. So a lot of ancient cultures have I guess, a similar sort of method of healing, because that's all we had way back then. So, but what we do is connect with what's going on, mind and body. Any advice I give is general in nature, is not specific to you and your circumstances, and obviously doesn't replace the advice of your medical practitioner. Okay. All right, so who am I? I am Alice. We already know that. So I am a wife of nearly 20 years. I'm a mother of 2 children. I have a 15-year-old boy and a 12-year-old girl. And actually my son, he's a unique boy, and he has been my greatest teacher. So he's actually the reason that I even knew kinesiology existed. So he had some, I guess, emotional regulation issues as a younger boy, and just, I don't know, a little bit different. And of course, we had him tested for lots of different things. And one of the people that I went to suggested that I take him to a kinesiologist. So I did that, and it worked out pretty well for him, actually. And I never really understood what these people were doing, what this person was doing to my kid, basically. And so a friend of mine was also taking her child to a kinesiologist, and she found this weekend course, and I was looking for the thing that I wanted to do, and I was actually looking at naturopathy and nutrition and had 100 excuses as to why I would never finish that. And I went to this weekend course for kinesiology, and that was the thing I wanted to do. And he's actually been my greatest teacher in a lot of ways, because every subject that I learned at college, he somehow had that problem a week or two before I started the particular subject. So it was really cool in that regard. I did learn a lot about working with kids, literally through my own child. So I am obviously a kinesiologist now. I am a mind-body medicine therapist and also an integrative complementary medicine practitioner, which is all lots of words basically to say that I interpret what the body is trying to tell you or them, and then also work on removing the stress to actually shift the stress on. And I should check my slides more carefully, because yes, I am a sleep facilitator, but it's also a stress remover. I'm also a mentor and coach. I do work with natural therapists, that are building their business, that are coming out of college, that sort of thing. I am a speaker, I'm an author, I'm a workshop facilitator, and I'm also a corporate wellness provider, and I run retreats as well. So I've got, I haven't been a lifelong natural therapist. I've been doing this for 6 or 7 years now. I've had a varied background, everything from micro business, like me, up to very large corporates. So I've had, a lot of different experiences in life, which have taught me lots and helped me in clinic now. Okay, so why do people usually bring their kids to see me for kinesiology? Fascinating. My slides have all mixed up because that little picture belonged to yesterday's talk. Anyway, that's okay. So usually people will bring their kids to me because they are struggling with what's going on for their child. So it can be about learning and development. So kids that are obviously struggling at school for some particular reason, or, are growing wise, are struggling a little bit. And it also can be, emotional development and intellectual development as well. People will bring their kids to me because of behavioural concerns of all different types, and that includes things, like, ADHD is not really it's a neurological issue more so than a behavioural issue, but, it does come with some challenging behaviours for some kids. So, and ODD, and things like that as well. Emotional regulation. Little kids can have really big emotions, as we know. I'm assuming everyone that's on this call has children. So we know that 3-year-olds and 2-year-olds are particularly helpful at big emotions. They know how to do that well. And I do see babies as well, obviously sleeping and settling issues, sometimes to do with intolerances and that sort of stuff. And the way that I work with littler kids is I actually use the parent as a surrogate. So if the little, I'll explain that a little bit later on, but if the littler they are, the less likely they are to be able to you know, work with me or understand what I'm saying, which is okay. I just use the parent instead. So awesome energetic principles as well. And I do see a lot of kids for anxiety. Life is stressful for little ones these days, and anxiety is a big concern for kids. So much more than I guess I remember when I was a kid, and probably even more than I saw. My kids are 15 and 12, as I said, so probably even more so than I saw, 10 to 12 years ago. So, yeah, that probably covers, I guess, the general gamut of kids that I see today. Because if I actually think about today, I saw a little man who has some emotional regulation issues. He has autism, level 1 autism. I saw a little one yesterday, bit anxious, little bit of trouble regulating emotions. Who else did I see this week? Another little one that's having some intolerance issues with food. And I think I did see, I did see a little one for some brain function issues, which I'll get to later. So kids, obviously, from baby to whatever age, I guess, until they become adults. So, kids of all ages do benefit from kinesiology. Okay, so the root causes of things that go on with our kids. So sometimes it is about nutrition. I'm sure everyone's had a fussy eater at some point. So getting the right amounts of nutrients and what have you into kids can be a challenge. So, and if they've got some gut stuff going on, then they can actually have absorption issues with that as well. Kids grow very fast, as we know, and so they burn through their vitamins and minerals reasonably quickly, particularly when they start, go through growth spurts and things like that. So their nutritional needs vary widely depending on where they're at in growth cycles and that sort of thing. And their nutritional needs are obviously generally larger than ours because of all the, the growth and the development and the brain stuff that goes on in that. They do need, good nutrition. So, all kids love, in general, I guess, nuggets and McDonald's and that sort of stuff. But as I've said the last couple of days with people, if you eat beige, you feel beige. And what I mean by that is, beige food in natural therapy lab is processed food. So diets heavy in processed foods for kids, tend to result in, poor behaviours sometimes, inability to concentrate and that sort of thing. But that is a challenge to be balanced, I guess, against peers and peer pressure and that sort of thing, which is a bit of a problem, particularly as they get a little bit older. When my little one, my boy, used to react a lot to artificial colours and flavours and that sort of stuff, which I never realised particularly until I cut the artificial colours and flavours out. And then I could tell you what reaction I was going to have from whatever he had. So that was entertaining. He doesn't tend to react behaviourally so much to that sort of stuff anymore, but he does still get shirty if he hasn't been eating particularly well. So a few other things that come up with kids: unexpressed emotions. Now sometimes that is, I guess, a genuine mental health issue in terms of, I guess, anxiety, sometimes depression, depending on the age of the kid, and some other emotional regulation things that go on. But sometimes it's actually about their ability to give the words to what they're feeling in a way that we can understand. So that's I reckon one of the biggest benefits for kids with kinesiology, because we're actually asking the body. So, I mean, most kids will be able to tell you they feel happy, they feel sad, they feel angry, that sort of thing. But when it's a little bit more complex than that, because obviously things that don't work well for them, they will tell you it makes them sad. So, but they don't really have the words around. Maybe it is actually that they feel a little bit of low mood. Maybe they're feeling a little bit anxious. Maybe they're feeling like they don't belong with their group of friends or things like that. But, you know, just because they're little kids, or, you know, sometimes they just don't have the words. And so kinesiology can help them put the words to the emotions that they're feeling. A fair amount of the time we see retained neonatal or primitive reflexes. And what that is, so, you know, when you have your baby and the pediatrician flips them over, and you kind of, especially with your first one, you're worried that they're going to drop the baby or break them or things like that. What they're actually doing is checking that those reflexes are in place. And that's really important because they're designed for survival. So there's a startle reflex. So you'll see babies, of course, that will startle and then they will cry. And that's actually a basic survival reflex, because what it does is open the lungs and then they can cry for help. So there's another reflex which is designed to help them wiggle out when they're being born. There's reflexes like they will throw their hand out if they turn their head. So, and that's to stop them rolling onto their stomach and suffocating themselves. There's several other reflexes. I mean, you know, a baby grabbing your finger is actually a reflex. So, and that is part of the safety thing. So it actually helps with the startle reflex, ironically. So there's about 8 or 10 reflexes, and they're all designed for various patterns of survival as a little one. Now, what they're supposed to do is actually progress and develop into more purposeful, intentional actions. When they don't, they can cause issues with learning, with behavior, even with absorption of foods and things like that. Until they integrate, they will always be a problem. So a good example is toilet training. The reflex that I was telling you about that is for wiggling out, that's called the spinal gland reflex. When that doesn't integrate, that will cause, as a general rule, it will cause bedwetting issues. So, and what I see, if the kids get to school and they've still got an active spinal gland reflex, they will do things like get into the classroom, they're told to sit up in their chair, and they will slide back in their chair to get their back off the chair, because that's what activates the reflex. Then they get into trouble for sliding down in their chair, so they get told to sit up straight. So then they sit up straight, and then they slide down again, and then they get into trouble for that. And then they will do things like this and hang on to the chair. Then they get into trouble for not listening, because they're so focused on trying to stay still that they literally cannot take in extra information. Some of the reflexes, like I was talking about, this sort of one, we can see that in handwriting issues with kids. Not necessarily neat writing, but, you know, not age appropriate abilities to write and draw and things like that. And yeah, a Omoro reflex, which is that startle reflex, that one triggers our fight-flight system. So it can, I often check that if the kid's having behavioural problems, if they're having excessive fear problems, and that can actually be a lifelong problem with people. They can get to be an adult and still have that problem. Now, the problem with that is if you have a Omoro reflex that hasn't integrated and you're driving a car, and if you don't actually have your hand on a steering wheel properly, so the people that drive like this, and you have an accident, you do this. So, or you're about to have an accident and you will do this, which is obviously significantly dangerous. So, you know, that's an extreme example. It's very rare that I see those sorts of things, but, you know, that's the sort of thing that can happen when reflexes don't integrate. So chiropractors also work on reflexes as well. So, but the idea with us is to get the reflex integrated so that the survival pattern that it creates doesn't happen, and then some of the things can go away. So it's worth looking at if your child does have any big behavior issues, learning issues, development issues, that sort of stuff. It's definitely worth considering. Heavy metals. So these can cause issues in everybody really, but I probably see it more in kids just because they're literally physically smaller. So our water can contain copper and lead and things like that, depending on where we live, how old our pipes are, those sorts of things. Some kids react to fluoride. I have seen that. There's a mercury and, but basically the way that the kids get the metals, they then sit in the body and we have to sort of shift those on for problems to go away. So often behavioral. Sometimes it's an absorption issue, but often it's behavioral. So for example, excess copper in the body will make kids explosive. So, and that is not necessarily something that we can see in blood tests. We often see it in tissue tests, like hair tissue mineral analysis and things like that. But there's other ways that we can test for that too. So, and it's just, the size of them a lot of the time, that's the problem there. Constitution. So, my goodness, my spelling was dreadful in this slide. Okay, so constitution is a concept in Chinese medicine where we use a concept called the 5 elements, which that's a whole talk all by itself. But basically, we have a 5-element constitution, and those 5 elements are water, wood, fire, earth and metal, and we tend to have different behavioral traits depending on the different elements. So for example, water is about fear, wood is about anger and acceptance, fire is about love, joy and hurt, earth is about meaning and purpose versus overthinking, and water, wood, fire, earth. Metal is about value and self-worth. So at a very basic level, we can have our constitution disposes us to particular styles of behavior and things that are important to us, and sometimes that's out of balance. Not so much with kids, but it does play a part in what else is going on for them, if it is, say, a reflex or heavy metals or ability to express emotions and that sort of thing. Sometimes it's environment. That can be school, that can be home, that can be daycare. If the parents are living in a particularly combative environment, I suppose, or a particularly unstructured environment, that can cause issues for kids around safety. So if they're feeling unsafe and ungrounded, that can actually cause a little bit of an issue. So if they're constantly having issues at school, that's probably something that does need to be addressed. But sometimes it is about conflict in the home as well. Kids like, as much as they don't, but they do like rules and structure. Because, and I'm not saying that we all need to live army-like, but they need rules and structure because it actually helps them to, while they're working out their sense of self, who they are, how they fit into the world and that sort of stuff. It gives them a safe environment and a structure in which that they know what is going to happen. So a little bit of predictability, I suppose, for them, which is often why the kids will be fine at school. And I actually see that a lot. The kids are fine at school. The second they get home, they turn into a completely different child. So, and that's because of the environment at school. They obviously have quite strict rules, and because they've got to handle 25 or 30 kids or whatever in a class, and they, there's no I guess, no big margins for error. The same rules apply to everybody. That's not always the same case at home. Now, some kids that doesn't work for, and I know schools like Montessori and Steiner schools have very different models to our standard education system, and that does work really well for some kids, and it doesn't really work for some kids. The same as a standard school environment works for some kids, and for others it just doesn't. So, and that can be a little bit with kids that are very much rule people too. It can cause a little bit of conflict too when the school environment and the home environment are very, very different. And then sometimes it's about where they are in their growth cycles. So, and their beliefs around safety and acceptance, and also who they are. So for the first 7 or so years, we generally take our cues from our parents in, you know, am I safe? Am I accepted? And who am I within the structure of this environment? So, and then what happens, that sort of that second period where we start to look more externally for friends, and that can happen as early as 7, and sometimes it doesn't really happen till high school, but then they start to look more to their peers for, you know, again, who am I? Can I trust these people? Am I safe with these people? Do they accept me for who I am? And again, who am I? So there's a few growth cycles, I guess, within that. So, but if they form beliefs around not feeling safe, not feeling accepted, and you know, even not necessarily understanding who they are, then that can be a problem as well. Now, the thing with that is that sort of comes into the unexpressed emotions, because they can form that belief and literally never say anything to you about it. So, and that may be because either they're not able to express their emotions or they just don't have the words for it. So, and parents can often be a little bit blindsided sometimes when things come up into the clinic because, oh, you never told me that. And sometimes, you know, the child thought, if they've formed that belief fairly early, you know, that's just a normal thought for them. So, yes. All right, moving on. Okay. Why do our kids struggle a little bit? Look, kids are really busy these days, particularly in metropolitan areas. There's lots of activities, there's lots of choice. I mean, adults, as we know, are usually quite busy. We've got lots of things on, lots of competing priorities and that sort of thing too. So now at school, you know, there's a fair bit of expectation on them. There is lots of stimulation, so they obviously get stimulated from, you know, family, from friends at school. Then obviously there's sports and activities and things like that, and then there's devices and TV and phones and iPads, and, you know, if you think about back to when we were kids, so much more stimulation. So it's also important to remember, as adults, we're actually the first generation parenting kids with the level of technology that is available to them now. So, you know, we're learning as we go. We're learning lots about how it affects children as well. Now that screen was there when I looked at it this morning. Okay, so there's lots of information coming into their nervous system. Let me just find the screen that I'm looking for, because that's quite important. So, because that shows how all of these things enter our nervous system and become quite the problem. Okay. All right, that's fine. I'll just open up this one instead. Oh, goodness. Okay. I think I will learn to save these slides separately. And okay, I've got to go back to share screen. screen first before I do that. All right. So share screen, that one. Okay. All right, bear with me. There we are. Okay, now this is a model that if you've been to my other talks, I've presented this pretty much every night this week. So basically what happens is when everything's about balance. In Western medicine, we call that homeostasis, and it literally translates to balance. So not too much and not too little, kind of like the Goldilocks approach. When everything's just right, things are not an issue for us. When we don't have enough of something, that's a problem. And when we have too much of something, that's a problem. So, and that would be considered to be the stress. Now, the thing is, the stress enters the body through basically one of these arms at least, and then it affects our nervous system. And our nervous system is our brain and our spinal column, and everything comes off that, yeah? All of our bodily functions, all of our movement, all of our everything comes off our nervous system. So, for example, let's say a little one's formed a belief about not being good enough. So maybe they have very high expectations on themselves. And, you know, that might not be because the parents or the school or anything has ever placed, you know, exceptionally high expectations on them, but they're just a person who, you know, has very high expectations of themselves. So they form this belief that they're not good enough. So what that does is that becomes a stress that enters the nervous system. So, and then that comes out in, say, negative thoughts, which affects the nervous system. They might get very upset when things don't go the way that they, you know, if they don't get an A or something like that. So then, of course, that affects the nervous system. That can affect the muscles because it's stressful, and that affects the nervous system. It can cause hormone and neurotransmitter issues, more so neurotransmitter issues in kids, which is the endocrine system. It can affect their immune system. They might be the sort of kid that catches everything that goes around, which will affect the nervous system. Digestive stuff, constant sore tummy, I feel sick, something's wrong, you know, and that affects the nervous system. And then we've got the energetic principles, so which is the energy is within and without us. So within us, we're affecting that through the flow of qi or blood, qi or vital force in Chinese medicine. And then also around us, we can sort of feel people almost touching us. We can sort of feel when someone's standing behind us, and that's considered to be the energetic body. So it just, you know, it just affects us. And then, so that affects the nervous system as well. So now the thing with the stress, so in this example, it's, you know, having this high expectations of themselves. It's a two-way street. Once it affects, you know, beliefs, nervous system, the nervous system affects the beliefs. And so it's like a negative reinforcement tool. So, and the longer we leave an issue, as we know, the bigger it gets. Okay, so I'm just going to jump back to my other slide and reshare again. Okay. Right. Share. And which one do I pick tiles? Okay, cool. All right, so that's the slide that we were on in the other one. Okay, so the things that I see in clinic, I have actually talked a little bit about this. So they can be little deep thinkers, the little ones that spend lots of time in their head, and they will ask the most interesting and insightful questions sometimes, but you can just see that they spend lots of time in their head. Sometimes they're quite angry. And they have lots of angry thoughts about things. Sometimes they just can't let things go. So this will be the kid that at the age of 10 will say something to you like, remember when I was 3 and you wouldn't let me have the Paw Patrol thing that I wanted at Target on the day that we bought those green pets. They'll be that, and they will remember in intimate detail those sorts of things. So that could be a very good thing. Memory is lovely, but you know, when it affects us emotionally like that, not so good. Poor concentration. So if they've got a very stressed nervous system, what that does is trigger a bit of a fight-flight response. And so what your body does naturally with a fight-flight response is scan for danger. And what are we doing when we're not scanning for danger? We are not focusing on what's going on in front of us. So if they are quite wired, they will have difficulty concentrating in the classroom. And sometimes they are struggling to learn. So this can come up in two different ways. It can be a global thing, but it can come up in two ways. They may really struggle with logic-based subjects like maths, 1 + 1 = 2. This kid will be the sort of kid that very arty, very creative, you know, very what they would describe as off with the pixies, but you know, the very creative sort of child. So they can have issues with logic and function. So that will often show up in things like maths and science. On the other side, you've got kids that very structure-based, very rule-based, black and white sorts of kids, and they can struggle with abstract concepts. So they won't like art and music and things like that. And as an older child particularly, they will actually struggle with things like English and sometimes history, things that require writing and opinion and analysis and things like that, where I need to give a little bit of heart, I guess, into a subject, as opposed to I can just rely on the very black and white 1 + 1 = 2. Like I said, that can be a global issue as well. Now, sometimes that can be actually what we would call brain function, and that does not mean there's anything wrong with your little one's brain. What it means is the way that the brain talks to each other. So you've got the two hemispheres of the brain, and basically how they pass information from one place to another. So, and that's something that we can work on, because you've probably heard of neuroplasticity, which is basically just rewiring the brain to do things a different way. So, and we can help with that. Body-wise, can't stay still comparatively to age. When boys are 5 years old, this will be a problem in school, because boys are not meant to sit still. They are meant to be, you know, out climbing trees and doing all sorts of things, because boys actually develop outwards. They actually develop their gross motor skills first and their fine motor skills later, whereas girls don't do that as much. That's not to say that all boys will be doing that, and obviously that all girls will be doing that. But I have to say, I do like the European model of schooling, where they don't sit into formal classes until they're about 7. So, because, you know, little kids learn through play. They learn through role play. They learn through climbing and digging and running around and that sort of stuff. So it is tough for 5-year-old boys particularly to sit still in a classroom. Other things I will see, balance and coordination. So maybe they're having difficulty with catching balls and things like that. They might have difficulty managing their upper and lower body. So they might be able to catch a ball, but not drop it and kick it, for example. They might have issues with climbing and that sort of stuff. They might be the kid that walks into walls, trips over their own feet, breaks everything, and outside of puberty, because that comes back as a problem with puberty. I described my boy when he was 13 as a baby deer, because he would he was all arms and legs and just breaking things left, right and centre. They will lash out, and it's a reaction. It's not necessarily an angry thing, it's just a reaction. So that will tell me a little bit about fight-flight stuff going on, maybe some brain function thing where the limbic or the fight flight brain is in charge, and they react before their frontal lobe has a chance to engage so that they can make different decisions. They might have sleeping issues. They might have been a poor sleeper from birth. They might start having issues with going to bed, staying in bed. Obviously, you know, monsters and those sorts of things, being separated from mum. And part of that is about, you know, working out their sense of self. You know, who am I? Who am I without my mum? That sort of thing. Concerns that are age appropriate too. So obviously, you know, developmental milestones, while they're not a competition, you know, they have an age range for a reason. So if we're having trouble with developmental milestones, that's something we can help with. And unfortunately, sometimes I see self-harm. So that can come in a variety of ways. That can obviously come through eating. That can obviously come through, and this is older kids, that can come through literally, you know, hurting themselves or deliberately putting themselves in harm's way and things like that. So, but, you know, if you've got a little one doing that, what they're telling you, and I don't mean little, because I very rarely see it in younger than about 10, that will tell you something is not right in their world. So, and they don't have a way to express it, or they don't feel like they have a way to be able to seek help, and they will find a way to get help. Soul-wise, relationship issues with kids, they will describe feeling different, or they don't belong, or they're out of place, or something like that. And then also just, you know, something's not right. So, and again, they're not always able to express what that is. So, but you will often see it through behaviours and thought patterns and things like that. Okay. All right, so how does kinesiology help? So as a general rule, the way that kinesiology will work is counselling, so talking about problems and that sort of stuff, working through the body's muscles, and this is obviously either online or face-to-face. So we start asking the body, is something stressful or is it not? So yes, it's stressful, no, it's not, and that's in relation to whatever it is we're working on. Now, this is the key benefit for kids, because what this does, this muscle monitoring, is actually get below your thoughts, your reasoning, your beliefs, your emotions, your subconscious. It gets really right into your body's functions. So, and this is where the benefit for kids is, because as I was saying, sometimes they just don't have the words. They can't explain it. They, you know, something's wrong. Maybe they recognize it, maybe they don't. Maybe it's you that recognize it, but they just, I don't know, you know, why have you got anxiety? I don't know. Why is your tummy sore? Oh, I feel sick, I better, you know, and it could be, and I'll just make sure I didn't turn my microphone off then. Make sure, you know, that might be, you know, feeling sick is usually a hallmark of anxiety. So, but they don't know why they feel anxious about stuff. Why are you scared of the monsters in your room that don't exist? I don't know. So, and we can actually get below that and start asking their bodies. So they might say, their body might say, through asking about emotions, asking about acupressure points that all mean different things. Okay, so this means this, and we obviously use age-appropriate language and concepts with kids so that they can understand, but they just, you know, so does this happen? Wow, you understand me. How did you know that? And they love it, because when they feel heard and they feel understood, they love that, because then it actually gives credence to the thing that they're having. So, because obviously, you know, kids with monsters and that sort of stuff, everyone says to their kids, you know, they're not real. So, but to them, they're very real. So they don't have the cognitive ability that we have. So when we can say, okay, so what's happening with that monster is you're feeling a little bit unsafe because it's dark. I mean, you know, that's an obvious concept that most of us can get around. But when things like that happen and we can help them put the words to it, then they feel, yeah, understood and heard, and that, you know, this person can help me. Now, in terms of resolution, so basically what we do, depending on the kid's age, we'll talk to them a little bit. Obviously, as they get older, we help them to understand concepts. I'm always talking to parents within clinics so that the parents understand what's going on, because sometimes there's ways that I can help you to help with your child in the circumstance that they're having. So I will talk to you a lot. So, and then we ask the body lots of bits and pieces, you know, to bring up the stress in the body. And then we look for something to be able to shift that on. So a lot of the time, I actually use energetic medicine a lot with kids. So things like chakras and crystals, working on the energy centers in the body, the chakras. Crystals, kids love crystals. They, I've just got a few here, which I'll show. I don't know how well they'll come up, but I've got things like amethyst and rose quartz, which is a pink stone. Here's citrine, which is a yellow stone. And I've got some carnelian here, which is a red stone. Kids love crystals, so they think they're fun with the rocks and that sort of stuff. And I can put the rocks or the crystals on the kids, and their body, what a crystal does is it has its own vibrational energy. The body has vibrational energy as well, and the body tries to vibrate to the energy of the crystal, because the crystal, unlike us, doesn't have a brain, so it doesn't worry about stuff. And with kids, because they haven't necessarily had their belief systems shut down yet, they will just go with this sort of stuff. It's actually pretty cool. And, you know, I will use crystals in certain ways, but sometimes the kids teach me stuff, and I will, you know, with kids, let them do whatever they like with the crystals in terms of how they want to use them, because, you know, they're just going with their innate wisdom, which is the problem, I guess, with adults. We lose our connection with our innate wisdom a lot of the time, so we're not listening. So, but yeah, kids will do all sorts of interesting things, and they can tell me a little bit about what's going on internally with them as well. I might use sound therapy. So I've got an elfin harmonic here. Basically, I just ding it, and depending on the age of the kid too, you know, use it, and that's a vibrational tool as well. Sometimes I'll be talking about nutrition and supplements. Not all kinesiologists are qualified to prescribe supplements. Some of us are, as I am, but we obviously are all able to talk to you about nutrition, because that is something that we study. So I usually have a toolkit of things to try to help get things into kids. If you're not aware of magic bean cake, look that one up. That's a really good way to get some good fibre into the kids. There's no flour in the cake, and it uses kidney beans, and my kids never knew. So I will use acupressure, so holding acupressure points. And the kids, they can feel that a lot of the time, because little kids, if I do points on certain points, they will actually push me off the point because they can feel something happening and they don't love it. That's not always the case, but there's a particular acupressure point at the back of the head which most kids will push me off a little bit, because that's about calming the nervous system down. I might look at tissue salts if we're needing to improve things like magnesium, potassium, phosphorus, zinc, those sorts of things. Kids will usually go a little bit better with magic drops than they will with taking necessarily supplements. And then I also give home reinforcement too, so things that we can do differently. That might be doing some exercises to help with brain integration. But a lot of the time when I'm working with kids, because any of the adults that have been to see me will know that just, you know, you get to lie down on the bed. Kids don't really want to stay still, and that's okay. I can be chasing kids around the clinic depending on their age the whole session. But I don't see kids for long periods of time. So generally, as I can work out what they need to do, they can play. I don't really mind if they wander around the room. I've got, you know, toys and that sort of stuff. So the kids kind of see it as a bit of a fun thing, and they just go with stuff. So they might, you know, they're quite trusting comparatively, I guess, to adults in that regard. So they tend to just go with the flow with what's happening in clinic. Little man that I saw this afternoon, actually, I think I told you about him. He's on the autism spectrum. What is he, 10, 9, 10, something like that. So he's having a few relationship issues with school. And what I did, I use metaphors a lot. So I actually told him this story about a fox and a hedgehog as it happened. And basically it's about, you know, worrying about your own environment as opposed to trying to overcome other people. And so he liked the story, and then we sort of, you know, we talked about how that applies to the issue that he's having with some friends. And he goes, oh, you know, and that made a lot of sense for him. So what we do, it's very fluid and very much targeted at the issue that your little one is having. Okay. What have we got up next? So kids I think they feel the energy a lot more than what adults do a lot of the time. So they feel buzzing or zinging or that sort of thing, but they're okay with it. They don't question it. They usually, especially little ones that are quite stressed, you can see it in their face when they finish, they just chill out. So they generally feel better. And look, I can only think of one example where a little one felt worse. And that was actually, I was working with him more on, he had a lot of pain issues, which was quite unusual for a little one. So he felt worse for a couple of days and then he was all right. So, but it can happen that little ones do feel worse, as can adults after a session. It's what we would call a healing crisis. So they usually are, you know, a lot more sensitive, I suppose, with a lot of stuff going on for their age. Okay. Things that help with kids. So let them get outside and play with their feet on the grass. That is awesome for them. It's really good for adults as well, but it's really good for kids. Very good for their foot proprioception, which is about the way that they receive information through their feet. And it's also very good for growth and development, and also grounding, so getting the energy out of their head. Walking with kids is awesome. I mean, movement isn't generally so much an issue with kids. Most kids move. Particularly with boys, they're not always as good at expressing their emotions. Take them for a walk. That's usually pretty good at getting them to talk, especially when they get a little bit older. If you can keep a kid moving, they will usually talk as well. So meditation, there's lots of really great meditations for kids. There's lots of apps that are available. There's lots of YouTube clips that are available, and they're usually very much story-based, kind of like the metaphors that I was talking about as well. So there's, if they're the sort of child that likes having stories read to them at night time, there's meditation books. If, you know, you're older school like me, you might have a CD player in the kids' room that you can put meditation CDs on, as well as a nighttime story. So that's pretty good with very intense little minds, and also with little ones that are having trouble sleeping. Progressive muscle relaxation is a bit of fun for kids as well. And that actually helps to teach them to, you know, self-regulate. So because they can feel quite in control of their body then, because they can tense their muscles and relax them. So kids quite like that as well. And it's actually good for them to learn this stuff at an early age, because I teach this stuff to adults. And if you've attended any of my talks this week, you've already seen this slide. Other things that are good for kids. Kids yoga is awesome. They love that. It's usually based around some sort of animal play and things like that. So You know, we'll pretend to be the dog or the cat, angry cat, happy cat, those sorts of things. Breathing exercises. Everyone shallow breathes when they're stressed, and if you watch your kids throwing a tantrum, that's exactly what they're doing. So we can do some breathing exercises with them. So we can try diamond breathing. This obviously isn't going to work in the middle of a tantrum, but so basically it is, sorry, you can't really see that. So breathing in for 4, holding for 4, out for 4, holding for 4. And some kids will, as adults will find that stressful. So we can do circle breathing, which is basically breathing in for 4 and out for 8. And a lot of the apps that we use for meditation for kids will often have some sort of breathing exercise to go with it to give them visual cues of how to do it. One thing that I really do like for kids is what's called a calm down jar. If your child's prone to throwing things, make sure it's plastic. But it's basically a combination of glitter, glue, and water. So sometimes little ones like to have Lego men thrown in it or something like that. And it's a variation to a theme of telling them to count to 10 and calm down, which never works. So, but this does, because what they do is you need to have it in a place that's accessible to them, and it needs to be in the same place all the time. So when they're starting to lose it, then go and get your calm down jar, shake it up, and just basically watch the glitter settle. So, and that's when you can implement breathing exercises and that. That works up to quite a fairly old age, actually, for kids. One boy I had was having a lot of emotional regulation issues. And what would happen is, you know, Dad was quite strict with him, and that wasn't working with him. So he would be trying, you know, he would be getting in trouble. Dad would be rousing on him. He would be trying to get away, and parents were not seeing the signs for him that he, you know, he was trying to say, look, I'm not coping with this environment. And so, of course, it would escalate and ended up quite the problem. So I made the mistake with this particular family where I didn't tell them that it needed to, you know, it was a signal for the child that they could go and get the thing, and that was a signal for the parents that they weren't coping. So, of course, he got into trouble for going to use calm down jar because he did exactly what I told him to do, which was, you know, when you feel this stuff coming up, go and use it. So, that's the important part with that. If it is in a place, it needs to be understood by all parties that when the child goes to get that means that they're giving you a signal that they're overwhelmed emotionally, and that they, you know, everybody needs to change what they're doing. So it needs to be important that they're not getting into trouble for trying to help themselves, if that makes sense. So that's a really good tip for kids, that calm down jar, and it's good fun to make it anyway, because then you've also got an opportunity when you're making it with your child to talk about how we're going to use it, and it's another tool in the kit. Did I put that on this slide or not? No, I didn't. Okay, another one is actually to have a toolkit of sensory stuff. Fidget cubes, slime, Play-Doh, even some string or rope or something like that, squeezy balls, those sorts of things. So they've got basically a box of stuff that they can fiddle with, and that can actually help them to get regulation for their emotions as well if they are struggling with emotional issues. Okay, so, oh wow, I've talked a bit. So that is the end of what's I've got to show you. So if you would like to get in touch with me, there's my website, there's my email, my phone number, and of course on all the socials as Kinesiologusts. Now, just give me 1 second while I stop recording.